In the small township of Kuldabad, a young boy earns pocket money singing popular movie songs for local tourists. He's confident enough to consider himself the local star attraction. Yet nearby is the tomb of a Mughal emperor and the magnificent ruins of an historic fortress. But that's the past, and he's only interested in the present. The future? Well, that'll take care of itself. The nation's Prime Minister, Mrs. Indira Ghandi, refers to her country as Eternal India. So, in a land that is everlasting and never changing, the greater percentage of the population lives from day to day, making no plans for the future. This juxtaposition of permanency and insecurity is interesting, but such is the dilemma of one of the world's largest populations. Ironically enough, one could say that our ever-increasing population is India's greatest ongoing problem. But it's also one of the reasons why, to an outsider, the country remains such a tantalizing enigma. For the next hour, we'll look at some of these 700 million faces, these animated mirrors of a heritage dating back many centuries before the birth of the Christian era. And who better to discuss contemporary India and its people than the Prime Minister herself? The people of India, a complex multitude whose ancestors include not only ancient indigenous tribes, but hordes of foreign invaders, from the Aryans and Persians and Mongols to the French, Portuguese, and British. To them, India was that distant land of mystery and bounty, and they came in their millions to discover and to conquer. But what really attracted them in the first place?
I think it was the news of India's wealth as well as the culture and philosophy that encouraged people to come from different points of view. I mean, there were those who came to plunder, those who came to trade, and those who came for the ideas. It's added to the richness of our country. I mean, idea, from the point of view of idea, culture, the arts, and so on. And fortunately, most of these people who came, they adopted India as their home. And we have, as a people, a genius for synthesis. That is, we absorb all these things into what is, I suppose, the essential or the eternal India. It's only the British who regarded it as something to exploit, and they never merged with us.
India, as a whole, received its first real taste of westernization during the turbulent 18th and 19th centuries from the British, or more specifically from what came to be called the British Raj, meaning rule. A military, then a political power, which emerged from the relatively innocuous British East India Trading Company. It was only after an immense uprising of nationalism, engendered by such leaders as Mahatma Gandhi, no relation to the present Prime Minister, by the way, that the country threw off the yoke of British colonialism for independence in 1947. Apart from a more efficient administration in many areas, including politics, the public service, and commerce, many pundits claim that the greatest legacy left by the British was the introduction of English as the main language of politics and communication in this land of multiple tongues and dialects. But in gaining independence, the people of India knew they'd have to compromise to some extent. Accepting their Western legacies, they set about reshaping them to their own demands, to their own standards, and began developing their own ideals for the future.
we're not at all anxious to have the standards of living of the Western countries, because we feel that it has brought them comfort but not contentment. But we do have to raise the standards of our people, because there are no two opinions about it. Population, well, will play a very big part in this.
To outsiders, it may seem that India's population far outweighs job opportunities in both primary and secondary industries. Of course, in villages, there's always a constant demand for basic commodities to keep the wheels of agriculture turning.
Up to now, we have managed to increase our agricultural production as well as our industrial production far more than the increase in population. But if the population goes on increasing as it has been, then obviously the shortage of land and of all the necessities will be a very major problem apart from employment.
The immediate suggestion is, of course, a nationwide program of birth control.
Our government is, I think, perhaps one of the first ones to have an official family planning program. But our emphasis was not just on population control, but on having healthier, happier families. Therefore, the family planning program not only tries to encourage parents to space out their children, to start having them much later, and also, of course, to take preventive measures. But at the same time, it helps people who don't have children and want a child.
India, however, has long indulged in a very different sort of family planning. Family planning, in quite a different sense, has been part of India's social structure, both in the Hindu and Muslim religions for many centuries. And that's the planning of marriages. Since early times, marriages have been arranged, though of course India was never isolated in this respect. Brides, often teenagers or younger, were chosen by the young man's father for reasons ranging from a convenient political alliance for nobility to an even more convenient one of financial gain, and that applied to all classes. The ancient dowry system, though theoretically banned by law nowadays, still flourishes. Classified newspaper ads extol the virtues of a suitable, eligible daughter. The word suitable being the key, as it implies that a healthy dowry will be thrown in by the girl's parents. Depending on the social standing of the young husband-to-be, the dowry's value, in cash and kind, according to recent reports, can range from $50 up to as much as $12,500. Often the boy doesn't see the girl his father has chosen, apart from a photograph if he's lucky, until the wedding ceremony. If he doesn't like her, that's too bad, because that's father's decision, and there the matter rests. However, whilst the government may be trying to recapture or retain past ideals, the times are changing in India. This traditional method of marriage is gradually passing into history as well. Arranged marriages are no longer mandatory, and even divorce is acceptable. One of the reasons for this is the growing liberation of Indian women, who are demanding a greater say in their own future. And, of course, a woman leading the country is an encouraging precedent. But surely the Western world influenced India's female emancipationists.
Well, to some extent, for perhaps the contemporary young women, but otherwise it's an Indian concept too. India, as you perhaps have gathered, is a land of contradictions. So we have in parts of India, the south as well as the east, northeast, the matriarchal system, where the woman is very much master of the home. And talking of divorce, we had divorce even in those times. I mean, if they were not happy, in a matriarchal system, the husband comes to live in the wife's home. And if she thought the marriage should be terminated, she just told him that, well, he should go away.
Divorce may sound simple enough, but an Indian wedding is usually an elaborate, highly colorful and noisy occasion. Often the groom, resplendent in traditional finery, arrives on horseback, preceded by entertainers. And more often than not, the dancing wench is a hijra, a professional transvestite. In some areas, it would seem, India remains a man's world.
The movement started, I suppose, in the 18th century for greater women's rights. And this is because although where a woman had character, she did assert herself, and we have had in our history women who achieved the top in many fields of activity. But the average woman, apart from the matriarchal system and the others, did have very much a second-class position, and they were oppressed and kept down. And there wasn't very much women's education, so there was a movement for this. But what gave it a very big push forward was our leader, Mahatma Gandhi, because he realized that women, being half the population, if they did not take part in the freedom struggle, it couldn't be successful. That they should not only participate actively, but sympathize and understand what it's all about. So he's the one who really started it.
It remains to be seen if this move towards women's lib, to use the Western expression, will benefit the Indian way of life.
Anybody's liberation benefits anybody's way of life, I would put it like this. And I think that not only in India, but all over the world, the men need equal liberation, because bossing people around doesn't mean liberation. And this is what they do, and this is what a lot of women would like to do. Whereas our view of liberation is that people should have the opportunity to develop their talents, obvious or latent, and to be able to develop their personality so that they can contribute to the maximum, into the various changes which should come about in societies everywhere.
Perhaps the most obvious contrast in this land of contradictions, and it not only applies to women, is between the lifestyle of villagers and the more affluent city dwellers. A large percentage of the rural population still desires to escape what could be called rural monotony for the often non-existent glamour and advantages of city living. And they come en masse, overcrowding the cities, their dissatisfaction urging them on in their search for prosperity, security, or simply a change in lifestyle.
I don't think people are ever satisfied, no matter where they're living or what they're doing. This migration to the cities is a worldwide phenomenon, as you know. Here it is more because I think of employment opportunities which are greater. But we are making every effort to improve the level of rural living as well as of the smaller towns, so that there isn't that pressure on the big towns. But to some extent, I think that the young people will always want to have the city experience as well.
India's economy is largely determined by agrarian policies. Yet not many foreigners actually get to know the countryside, where there's always something of interest to see, even if it's simply the mundane practice of the village barber. Unfortunately, visitors to India invariably see only the blatant contrast of poverty and affluence in large, thronging cities such as Delhi, Benares, Bombay, and Calcutta. And this is instantly taken by many of these outsiders as being representative of modern India.
I don't think you can take any one part of India and say it represents the whole, because India is a country of very wide variety and diversity, of which we are proud, and which we think that far from weakening us, actually strengthens our unity. So you will really have to see the different aspects of India to know what India is.
As Mrs. Ghandi says, to get a true picture of India, it's necessary to see all aspects of the country. Escape the cities and discover the villages, where daily life is full of interest and variety. For example, if you need a new water pitcher, you go straight to the manufacturer, the village potter, who mass produces them on his rudimentary wheel.
Even though we are predominantly a rural economy, and it is the villagers who represent the larger proportion of the population, India has been known in its very long history for its urban development. For instance, Mohenjo-daro is about, I suppose, 4,000 years old. And it had, in the ruins, we see a very well laid out drainage system, and it's a very planned city, town. And similarly, Benares, which is a modern town as well, is also about 3,000 years old.
In many places, lifestyles have changed little in those 3,000 years. And it's a culture shock to many newcomers to see people sleeping in the streets or even a communal wash day.
It's an entirely different lifestyle. You see, one's lifestyle has to match one's climate, and therefore some people who come from abroad are shocked if somebody's sleeping outside, whereas until air conditioning was discovered, all of us slept outside in the summer, no matter how wealthy or affluent you were. So it's a different outlook on life. But of course, we are very far from having the affluence which you find in some of the Western countries.
Education makes a people easy to lead, but difficult to drive. Easy to govern, but impossible to enslave.
This 19th century philosophy could well apply to modern India. With overnight freedom, after more than 3 millenniums of foreign domination, India's leaders would obviously agree with another pronouncement on education, that of novelist H.G. Wells.
Human history becomes more and more a race between education and catastrophe.
Probably well aware of this, the government has stepped up its education programs over the past few years. Already the country's literacy rate has increased greatly to what it was, even 10 years ago.
I think it's about 34%, but it's the lesser literacy amongst women which brings down the percentage.
Which poses the question, are there equal educational opportunities for both boys and girls?
Well, the opportunities are equal, but in certain places people are hesitant to send their girls to, they go for primary education, but later on they tend to drop out. By the way, although the national average is 34%, in some states it's very much more. For instance, Kerala is double.
However, in many places, educational opportunities for village youngsters are certainly far less than those for city children.
Even though many of our people are not literate, they have a kind of cultural literacy. And recently a Frenchman who was studying in Indian village for about 20 years, he has written in his book that he could talk about politics, rural problems, philosophy, and he found that our illiterate peasants had greater facility discussing all kinds of subjects like this than he would be with a similar level of person in France who were educated, for instance.
A race between education and catastrophe. To survive, India will need to ensure it wins that race. A little over 30 years ago, India was inevitably associated with Maharajas and opulence. At the beginning of 1947, these princes ruled estates covering 1/3 of India. In a world of elephant processions, tiger hunts, marble palaces, Rolls Royces, and literally mounds of gold and jewels. Some were conscientious rulers. Others were playboys, more involved in scandalous affairs than affairs of state. But all of them were fabulously wealthy. However, with independence in the August of 47, that fabled opulence came to a sudden end. The princes were asked to sign an act of accession which took away their sovereignty and income. In return, they were granted allowances called privy purses. Then in 1971, the Constitution was amended to terminate even those allowances.
At that time, Mrs. Ghandi was also the Prime Minister.
A decade later, she comments on the role of Maharajas in today's community.
Well, I would say largely what it is of royalty everywhere else. Because in most places they have had to adopt an entirely different lifestyle. Now here we try to, although we've pensioned them off in a sense, we have helped them to become part of contemporary living. Many of the Maharajas are in politics. The older ones against us, the younger ones in our party. The brighter ones, if I may say so. But many of them have taken to business enterprises, and many of them have turned their palaces into hotels. And so I think they're active. They're taking interest in environmental problems and all kinds of things like this.
I'd like to make it very clear that the merger of the states and the integration of the states was a voluntary act on the parts of the Indian states.
The Maharaj Kumar of Udaipur, whose family ruled the central western Rajput state of Mewar for centuries. He's the son of the present Maharana, a Maharana being the Rajput equivalent of a Maharaja.
It was not a forcible imposition, nor was it, barring a few, an act of violence of any nature at all. Consequently, the rulers wanted to amalgamate themselves into the Union of India and form a powerful, independent India as it is today. If you take the history of our family, which goes back 14 and a half centuries, 76 generations, I would say that we have had many such experiences in life where we have managed to come on top and still remain at the helm of affairs. So it has really not radically changed our lifestyle in any way, but I would go to the extent of saying that the institution of Maharana, which is my father, who's the 75th Maharana of the state of Mewar, is a unique one, perhaps the parallel of which you may not find in the history elsewhere. The ruler of the state of Mewar is Eklinji, which is Lord Shiva. And we are the Divans. The head of the family is the Divan to the court of Lord Eklinji, which you can compare in English to the post or the office of either a trustee, a managing director, a chairman, or a prime minister. We were administrating the state of Mewar on behalf of Eklinji. And this has been the prime value as far as the family is concerned, to serve the people of the state of Mewar as prime ministers, and we continue to do that. Of course, it has changed. We have to move according to the time and present framework of law, and we have made certain adjustments, and we have created certain trusts, we have created certain employment opportunities, we have created some educational trusts, charitable trusts and things like that, by which we continue to serve the people in the way we have been always doing. So the object remains the same. The methods, of course, are within the conformity of the law today.
Within the conformity of the law today. For centuries, these legendary nobles were a law unto themselves, so the reversal of 1971 must have come as a bitter shock to them. Before independence, they lived in splendid grandeur. Their homes were majestic palaces, breathtaking in design and lavish in decor. Today, many of these edifices are too costly to upkeep, so they've been closed down. Plush velvet couches have dust covers. Crystal chandeliers are wrapped in plastic, vainly protecting from the ravages of time the dreams of what used to be. Some palaces have been turned into essential money-making ventures, such as museums. One section of Jaipur's city palace is now a public museum. At the rear are the private quarters of the Maharaja of Jaipur, another astute businessman who also managed to survive the debilitating demands of independence. Other palaces have become magnificent five-star hotels.
I'm a hotelier. I studied hotels in England and in America. I basically feel a Rajput is traditionally a service-oriented person, and I also wanted to continue doing hotels, so I went into hotels, and we have converted 3 of our properties in Udaipur at the present moment, which are hotels. The most famous one, of course, is the Lake Palace, which is located in the middle of the lake. The other one used to be our old hunting lodge, which we have converted into a hotel. We want to make a game park, a safari park over there. The other one is for the domestic travelers, salesmen. The 2 are under construction, so I think we have some experience as far as hotels is concerned in Udaipur.
A successful businessman, the Maharaj Kumar is also a successful sportsman.
I used to play a lot of cricket earlier. I played for my state for almost 15 years in the national championship. I also visited your country in connection with cricket. But now I'm switched over to polo, which I really enjoy very much. I have taken this sport up in the last 3-4 years. I breed my own polo ponies at the farm. And I also breed racehorses for racing. And I think I'm quite fascinated with this game. आगे गए बैकहैंड देना चाहते थे, नहीं दे सके और चौहान ने बैकहैंड दिया और कल आगे बढ़े कल शॉट अच्छा शॉट लगा के और बड़ा मुश्किल शॉट उन्होंने दिया, हालांकि उनका प्लेयर जो था खुद वो कह रहा था कि बैकहैंड दो, लेकिन उन्होंने शायद सुना नहीं और आगे शॉट देना चाह के बाहर चली गई। टीम वर्क में बहुत जरूरी है कि जो पीछे वाला प्लेयर गेंद मांगता है हाथ मारता है।
The glory of India's Maharajas has now passed into history. And for all those who managed to land on their feet, there are those less fortunate. In order to survive, Many haven't stored their antiques under wraps or in museums. They've sold them. And in modern India, priceless objects which once adorned great palaces now cram the shelves of humble backstreet antique shops. The adjustment to practicality for some of the nobility was perhaps too sudden, too severe to comprehend for them to emerge unscathed.
It's very difficult to generalize, but I would say basically they have done pretty well for themselves. The ones who have not been able to make the change so successfully are the ones who were originally the people who signed the instrument of accession, because they were the third generation and they perhaps couldn't cope with the change as well as some of the others, some of the younger ones. Some have gone into politics, some have gone into farming, some have gone into business, some have, dropped out, unfortunately. And I think, by and large, everybody is trying to find their feet, and quite successfully. I'm quite pleased. I think the future is very bright. I think the future is as good as you make it out to be yourself. And I think, personally speaking, for our family, I think we will continue to serve the people of Mewar and try and do as best as we possibly can in whatever way we possibly can to see that the people in Udaipur are there to preserve the democratic values of this country.
For foreign tourists, India is usually first stop the Taj Mahal, then other places worth seeing, such as the man-made caves at Ajanta. But then all of India is worth seeing, and no matter what language you speak, you'll probably find the tourist guide can cope. A renewed interest is being taken by the outside world in the quality of India's cultural heritage. In many arts and crafts boutiques throughout the world, Indian handmade articles fetch quite a handsome price. Hand weaving is still carried out in most of India's hamlets, for the machine age has yet to invade and replace these age-old methods. The pace may be slow, but painstaking attention to detail assures a beautiful and much sought-after finished product. And the best bargains are, undoubtedly, those bought on the premises.
At the moment, however, most foreign tourists see only the overtly exploited magnificence bounded by the northern golden triangle of Delhi, Jaipur, and Agra across to Khajuraho. And tourists themselves are eagerly exploited. Being the major western port of entry for foreign visitors, Bombay abounds with every conceivable money-making gimmick.
These small bands of performers, many of them members of the same family, turn out on the beach and go through the same arduous routines hour after hour, day after day. They gratefully accept whatever coins the holiday makers in nearby luxury hotels care to toss them. Ironically, their most enthusiastic audience is the same group of local beach dwellers who, although they catch the acts hour after hour and day after day, still seem enthralled and amused. For them, of course, the show is free, even though the bill seldom changes. Tourists, on the other hand, are always demanding something new.
But with internal promotion coupled with a great upsurge in world tourism, foreigners will soon be exploring beyond the major cities and the Golden Triangle. Already beset with problems of domestic overcrowding, India will have to cope with a possible overcrowding of foreigners as well.
Many hotels have come up, and we are trying to improve our airports, have more services to take them to, because some of the best monuments from the architectural point of view or natural beauty are not always so accessible, they're not near towns. So we are trying to improve all this. But I think you have to appreciate that for us that's not the first priority. We have to first look after our own people and also encourage internal tourism, because we think of, and this is not a new thing, in the Hindu religion especially, in very, very ancient times, we were asked to travel to certain places of pilgrimage. And they were located in the very, very far north, in the southernmost point, and the easternmost, and the western point. So that a religious person, and especially the Orthodox, and before they died, had to travel all over India at a time when there were hardly any travel facilities, and when there were hundreds of kingdoms with different Maharajas. So it's traveling and seeing the country is a very old tradition. So we have to cater to them, but of course we do welcome foreign tourists, and not only to see the glories of ancient India, but to see something that we are doing in contemporary India. Because I think that that is what we have been able to achieve is quite remarkable in this short time, and with all the difficulties, because a lot of people have gone ahead because the road was clear. I mean, they could concentrate on the economics of it.
Modern India has achieved a great deal, but have individuals gained any benefits from economic progress?
We started by giving our people equality, or at least to work for their equality, freedom of expression, freedom of association, and the democratic process, although we are committed to it, we have no intention of changing it in any way. It does make things more difficult because people try to put obstacles in whatever you're doing. And also that you have to look after certain interests, which the Western countries didn't when they were industrializing, the workers' comfort and so on.
India, of course, is more than a land of magnificent architectural and, to a certain extent, industrial wonders.
As already noted, there's great diversity in India's arts and crafts and cottage industries. This craftsman, the village silversmith, has a unique source for his raw material. He melts down silver spoons to refashion the metal into delicate trinkets.
These arts and crafts have obviously developed from both tribal origins and from the influence of foreigners.
It depends who you call foreigners, because many of the people who at one time were perhaps foreigners, now we regard as very much Indian. In fact, most people, I suppose, if you compare them with the tribals, are descendants of foreigners.
Whatever their origins, Indians, as has every civilization, concentrated on creating life's basic necessities. Whether it's weaving, or pottery, or the making of farm implements, the techniques have been passed on for generations and will probably continue for generations to come. The same applies to culture.
Tribal culture is very rich and diverse, the folk art, the folk music and dance. Over the years, and all this of course is centuries old, it's not recent, we have been taking through trade and other contacts with other people.
The hypnotic rhythms of the sitar, often a trifle monotonous to Western ears, so accustomed to a Tchaikovsky melody or a top 40 tune, are nevertheless the authentic, instantly recognizable sounds of India. And there's no doubting the ability needed to master this classical instrument. Of course, every artist, every craftsman, whatever his profession or trade, takes a pride in his work, even though it does mean employing techniques which are centuries old. The village plough maker is no exception.
We have this extraordinary capacity of absorbing and making something our own. So it's very difficult to say what is absolute, except for the tribal arts. The rest of it was picked up from somewhere and made our own. It's remarkable how we've kept to these traditional arts and crafts, how they've persisted through the ages.
The main reason for the persistence of this tradition is actually easy enough to comprehend. Every villager, whatever his calling, is restricted by caste to social guidelines which themselves have persisted through the ages. Thus his lifestyle, from birth to death, is preordained and seldom changes from that led by his ancestors. And he accepts this restriction with ease. The modern trend to break away and try something new would be completely foreign to him.
Of course, sometimes modernization spoils things because traditionally people have almost an instinctive feel for line, for color, for design. But once you break the traditional pattern, they feel a little lost. Then they tend to want to imitate, which is not so good.
Yes, India is definitely a land of contradictions.
There's a great diversity of the things you can see here, ancient and modern. And I think it's interesting for people who've lived in a particular style of life to see that something else does exist and that it has kept its own through thousands of years. So there must be something in it.
Ancient or modern, the sights and sounds of hidden India and its 700 million faces will continue to fascinate the traveler because the rhythm is forever changing.
Basically, the most wonderful thing in India are its people. The courage with which they face their difficulties, and it has nothing to do with resignation. Sometimes the West tends to think that both things are the same, that if you're facing up to a difficulty, you're resigning yourself. You're not. We have been struggling against various problems and solving them. But there is a spirit of serenity and calm in the people, which is, comes from inside. And that is why so many people from the West are coming now to seek this sort of a better understanding of life. But of course, I think that I wouldn't boast and say that only India has to teach something. I think in the world of today, we are advanced enough in other areas and directions to try and have the wisdom to learn from one another and to cooperate with one another. And it can only be a joint endeavor. It's not no one country or one civilization can show the way. It's a joint thing. How do we keep what is good in the past and use whatever is best now and is to come in the future? I think that is a path we have to make.